All right, so we're looking at the first section of the topic 5 notes, and our essential question at the very beginning of this thing: how can I determine the midpoint of a line on an XY coordinate plane? And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at finding a midpoint on finding the midpoint of a line segment that is on an XY coordinate plane. So let's look first at stuff that we have seen before. This is the stuff that we've looked at before is finding a midpoint of a line segment that's just laid out on a number line. And we've done this before back, I believe it was pretty close to the beginning of the year when we first started talking about line segments. Okay, a midpoint. Midpoint is very self-explanatory. The midpoint is the middle of the line segment. So there are a couple of different ways you could count it. A couple of different ways you could find it. One of them was just looking at the picture and counting off 1 unit or 2 units at a time until you reach the middle. If we did that on this one, we could count off 6 from there and 6 from there, and we find a midpoint of 10. But there was a mathematical formula that we used that showed what it was. And it was this formula right here. If A and B are the endpoints, then you would take A plus B and divide it by 2. You take A plus B, the 2 endpoints, and divide it by 2. And basically what we were doing is we were finding the average of those 2 endpoints, finding the middle ground, the average of 4 and 16. So we take 4 plus 16 and divide it by 2. That 20 over 2 is equal to 10. So that was our midpoint. It was exactly the same as if we counted 6 from this side and 6 from this side, and we got 10. We ended up with the same midpoint. So this mathematical formula is the basis of what we're going to be doing with all of these. What we're going to be doing right here is finding the midpoint of a line segment. Okay, so it's pretty easy to just look at it, and you could tell that the middle of this line segment is going to be about the average value in between the values of the 2 endpoints. That's a little bit more difficult to do, and it's not even possible to count one thing at a time going up a diagonal line like this. So here's the formula that we started with. When we were only working in one dimension, when we were only working on the one number line, we found the average of the 2 endpoints, A plus B divided by 2. Well, what we're going to do to find the midpoint on a diagonal line with an x coordinate and a y coordinate is basically the same thing. The midpoint is going to have an x value and a y value. And what we're going to do is we're going to find the average of our 2 x values of the endpoints, and then find the average of the y values of the endpoints. So you add together the x values, divide by 2, add together the y values, divide by 2. Okay, right, get that formula written down. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to plug in these numbers where they go into this formula. So we start with the x coordinate. For the x coordinate, we take -2, this x value, plus 3, this x value, divide by 2. For the y coordinate, we take this y value, 4, we take this -2. Now look at this. It says to add those two things together, but 4 plus -2 is the same thing as 4 minus 2. So that's where that comes from right there. We end up with -1 over 2 and 2 over 2. Well, this 2 over 2, anything over itself is always going to reduce down to 1. Okay? Oh, there's a mistake right there. Okay? Before we move on, let's address that mistake. -2 plus 3, that's supposed to be positive 1. That is supposed to be positive 1 right there. So we end up with positive 1/2, not negative. Okay, and looky here. If we were trying to plot this on the point, positive 1/2 and 1, well, that's about right there. And when you look at that picture, that looks like it's about the middle of that line segment, right? Okay, so I'm not saying that we should always trust what the picture looks like, because again, we've talked about this before. The picture can lie to you, but if your math checks out, as it does right here after we fix that mistake, if your math checks out, then that picture can be a helpful guide. it can at least point you in the right direction and tell you if you're on the right track. All right? So that's what we get. We get positive 1/2 and 1. All right, go on now to the next problem. Okay, find M. This is the same as we were just talking about. M, that's the midpoint. This midpoint right here, M, the midpoint of that line segment. So we are using that same formula where we find the x value, we find the average of the two x values, we find the average of the two y values, and what that does is it gives us the middle ground for our x's and y's is going to be the middle ground of that whole entire line segment. All right, we plug in the x values, we get -2 plus 5, -2 plus 5. Plug in the y values, we get 1 plus 4. When we simplify all that down, we get 3 over 2 and 5 over 2. Now, I want y'all to think about this for a second. Okay, 3 over 2, that's 1.5. 5 over 2, that's 2.5. Does this point look like it's about 1.5 and a y value of 2.5? Yes, it does. That right there is our answer. Okay, that right there is a good answer. It matches what this picture gives us as a guide. Okay, don't take that the wrong way. You know that the pictures can lie to you, but in this case, it's a pretty good guide that we're on the right track here. 3 over 2 and 5 over 2. So this next problem is similar to some of the ones that are on your Canvas. On your Canvas set of problems for today, the Topic 5 Practice Part 1. This one tells us this one is a different setup than those previous ones. On those previous ones, it gave us what the two endpoints were, and our job was to find the midpoint. Well, on this one, it gives us one of the endpoints, and it gives us the midpoint. Okay, so this right here, this blue one at 3, 8, that is the midpoint. Okay, we are trying to find what are the coordinates of the other endpoint. Is going to be somewhere vaguely up here, okay? If that's one of the endpoints, it goes up, there's the middle. That means our other endpoint is going to be somewhere up here. We need to figure out exactly where it's going to be. All right, so here's what we can do. We're going to take that same exact formula, okay? The x values are found as the average of the two endpoints. The y value of our midpoint is the average of the two endpoint y values. Okay, and we know that our midpoint M is located at 3, 8. They gave us that right up here. 3, 8 is the midpoint. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to split it up. We're going to find our x value and our y value of the other endpoints separately from each other. Okay, we know that 3, 8 is our midpoint. So let's start with the x values. We know that 3 is the x value of the midpoint, this blue one right here, 3. So that means all of this mess of stuff right here, -2 plus x over 2 is equal to 3. Now we're trying to get this x by itself. That's what we're looking for. Our answer is going to have an x value and a y value, the coordinates of b right here. So what we're looking for is to get this x by itself. And to do that, we have to recognize something, okay? When you're solving an equation, what you're doing, and y'all already know this, what you're doing is you're undoing everything that's happening to x. And what you're doing is you're going through the order of operations backwards so that we can end up with the variable by itself. Well, when you have something on top of the fraction like that, when you have a bunch of stuff on top of the fraction, you have to treat that like it's its own set of parentheses. That whole entire thing, not just the -2, not just the x, the whole thing is all being divided by 2. So we need to get this x out of the fraction, and the only way to do that is to get rid of this denominator. Y'all got to remember also that a fraction, that's just a fancy way of talking about division. So this whole mess of stuff is being divided by 2, and the way we undo that is multiplying times 2. So we take this, and we multiply both sides times 2. All right, I'm going to write that down up over here. We take that whole thing, and it's times 2. Times 2 on both sides. So this becomes a 6, and this becomes just the stuff that was left on top. -2 plus x. Getting that x by itself, we're one step away. We got to move a negative 2 over. How do you undo minus 2? You add 2. So x equals 8. All right? That right there is not our entire final answer. That right there is only half of our final answer, because remember, our answer is a point. So it's got an x value and a y value. Okay, up next, we're going to do the exact same process with the y value. We already know that our midpoint, the y value is 8. So we can take this whole mess of stuff and set that equal to 8. Okay, the process right here is the same. All of this on top, you treat it like it's in its own set of parentheses. The whole entire thing is being divided by 2, so we have to multiply times 2. We get 3 plus y all alone, all that stuff from the top of the fraction by itself. We multiply times 2, it gets rid of that denominator, and we got 16 on the other side. Once again, we're one step away from having y by itself, and it's 13. Those two things together, the 8 and the 13, those two things together, that's what makes up our answer. Our other endpoint that was missing is 8, 13. If we wanted to plot that on our graph up here, it's going to be right up here. Again, you can't always trust exactly what the picture looks like, but that kind of looks like we're on the right track, doesn't it? If we were to extend that line about like that, that looks about right to me. All right. That's about what we're looking for. Where that blue one is our midpoint, this is the other endpoint that we just found. All right. So there are some Canvas problems, just like all of these examples. There's more of these where you find the midpoint. There's several of those, and then there's a couple that are like this where you have to find the other endpoint. Okay. I want you to ask me questions. I want you to use your notes. I want you to talk to your neighbors as you work on this thing. Okay. Ask around. Don't just ask me. Sometimes it's more helpful for y'all to explain this stuff to each other, because a lot of times I don't know exactly what you're missing, but one of your friends would have the exact same problem as you, and they can figure it out. Okay. A lot of times y'all can explain this stuff to each other even better than I can. Okay. So ask each other, ask me, use your notes, and get after those practice problems. All right. We'll see you again another day.